Okay, officially, it is our honor and pleasure to welcome Hélène Cixous for this Q&A, and also thank you for the conversation with Peter Engelmann, to which we are all responding now. I want to thank our collaboration partners, Passagen Verlag, Theater Neumarkt, and Universität Zürich. I will be moderating this Q&A. I'm Stefanie Heine from the University of Zurich. And just to let you know how we will proceed, please let me know if you have questions via the chat function. Just signal that you have a question, and then I'll keep an eye on who's first and who's second and who's next. And please keep your questions as short as possible, because we only have 30 minutes time, and we will start right away, and I'll take the liberty to ask the first question, which is Hélène Cixous, you mentioned that writing is a question of breathing and breath, some breathing, something which we do every day, all day, without mostly noticing it. And my question would be, could you tell more about the relation of the corporeality of writing to breathing, especially in contrast to the relation of writing, of breathing and spoken language, which is literally carried by breath, which is not the case in the written word?
Well, actually, since you point to breathing, it's not the only kind of definition, of course, that fits writing. But after all, it has to do with music and with all kinds of music instruments where you have to breathe in and out and blow and modulate and of course the voice. I think that I've been struck for a long time by the fact that people will tell me that when they read, particularly what I write, they hear my voice. Of course, this is fantastic. It's I don't know whether it's true, but it's true somehow. What they hear is a rhythm. And of course, it's not conscious. That is, when you write, you're carried away by speeds which run through you. And I've seen painters paint, great painters, and I adore that. And I think writing is comparable to the physical exercise of painting. When you take a painter, he's very small, and his canvas is wall high, and he rushes, at the canvas and strikes it, and then he's on horseback. And I think writing is the same. Maybe it's not just horse riding. I couldn't say that for myself, but it has to do with climbing, with really very often climbing steep mountains, or just the contrary, on climbing down, and also stop breathing, because you have to stop breathing for a while in order to wait for the writing to slow down, because the writing is much speedier than you are yourself, And of course, it has to do with being in good shape. You can't write properly, of course. You can always write. I mean, as a journalist, you have to write all the time and mechanically. But for poetical writing, you do have to feel well, to be tireless, and if you tire, you have to stop immediately, because you won't write anything that's worthwhile. And this is very difficult because I know it's a kind of discipline. You start writing and you go on and on, or you want to finish a page, but if you feel that your body is not answering as subtly as you want it to do, then it's no use.
Thank you.
It's not
so the next question will be by Felix Christen. Felix, please go ahead.
In the talk, you said that writing goes into the forest, that it is in the dark. There is a passage in Rollo Barthes's Variation sur l'écriture in which he writes about the graphic opacity, the graphic darkness of writing. Do you think that there is something dark, something perhaps even incomprehensible about the writing process? Something we don't understand even when we write ourselves?
Of course, when you write, you have to give up the idea, which should even come near, of knowing. It's really not knowing, not that it is ignorant, but it's exploring wilderness. And I think that the feeling you have most currently is a very troubling and disquieting feeling of maybe being very close to madness. Not that you really mad. Isha, viens. That's my cat. Viens vite. Viens vite, Isha. Vite. Hop. Hop, Isha. Hop. Hop. Hop, Isha. She wants to participate. Viens, Isha. Ma fille. If you understand, then you haven't found out anything. You must be lost. Of course, you must feel lost, and of course, this feeling lost, which is the proof that you're on the way to writing, is not something that you will cultivate or stay put with. No, it's a kind of it's the signpost of the direction. And then you have to admit that, of course, this, speaking like that might seem to be arrogant and or stupid. But it's the contrary. I think it's very humble. You submit to powers which use you, carry you further, and you have to trust the tempest. It's not, it's not still dark. No, it's not. No, it's not motionless. It's full of fluxes, winds, etc., and it carries you. Of course, this is a feeling when I started writing. That is, I didn't start writing. Writing started. So writing started. I was terrified because I thought this is not normal. I don't know where I'm going, and I dare not look at what is coming out on the surface of the page because it's threatening. Then I got used to this threat and fear, and realized that it was the proof that something is happening, which is much powerful than you are yourself.
Thank you.
The feeling of dark, it's really because you don't see it. You don't see. It's not figurative, of course. It's as I say, it's very windy, and you hear winds and voices, etc., etc. And it sings. So that's why it's so extraordinary. Sorry.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
It's me.
Next question. Okay, our next question is from Annika Haas. Annika, go ahead.
Hi, bonsoir de Berlin. In the talk with Peter Engelmann, you were, he was asking about the role of writing in times of the pandemic. And I was wondering, since, I mean, you also often refer to how reading is a part of writing. Which role does reading and does literature as a space of encounter and communication play for you in these days where we are physically apart? And I mean, often we are physically apart, but maybe did something change for you regarding reading and entering the space of literature as a mode of coming together, of finding community in literature? No, I wonder.
No, actually, but now I have changed. But in the beginning of this year, it was a big shock. It was a trauma, not in reading at all. Reading is always there. It's eternal. It's immortal. All our wonderful relations, relatives, friends, etc., in literature are they faithful to and present in all situations, wherever they're, even in the worst catastrophes. Writing is much more difficult. I suddenly felt that the events were dictating. They were dictators. They were dictating to me. They were everywhere, and they were telling me, "This is your subject." Then I was deprived of unknowing. I couldn't do away with knowing, with being informed. You know, everything that is contrary to inspiration, to the joys of exploring. And this shocked me. At the same time, I enjoyed it, because all my life I have questioned the limits of the powers of writing, particularly when I started writing. I kept thinking, does one write in concentration camps, and how does one do that? And that was long ago, before I saw all kinds of masterpieces grow out of concentration camps, and even laughter. So, but this time, it's unique, not that it is worse than other times, of course not, but it's unique in its features, and it as a kind of phenomenon. We've never met that. History has, of course, because plagues, there have been hundreds in history. But suddenly there was a restriction. At first I thought, I'm certainly not going to read La Peste, Camus, which I have read, of course. I have read 100 times in my life, Defoe's Journal of the Plague Here, etc. And I thought, I want to approach them. And of course, then I just couldn't help reading those very texts and being fascinated and attracted and thankful, because they are really, some of them are absolutely extraordinary. They're so great, so true to the feelings of mortals. And I had a kind of, I was struck by the power of, I don't know how to pronounce it in English. How do you say Thucydides? How do you say for the Greek historian? Thucydides? Or how?
Thucydides?
Thucydides?
Yeah.
The plague in Greece during the War of Athens. It's so beautiful, because it is absolutely faithful to a reality which was as unknown as the discovery of a planet. It was a planet, and their history is born as a science, as a philosophy, as a new way of taking part in the fate of mankind. So I thought it's very noble. It's really the struggle of man with his own inhumanity. But then it compels you. You can't escape.
Okay, our next question is from Marlene Meyerhofer. Marlene, go ahead.
Hi. I figured when you talk about writing, you talk about economics a lot, and I feel you always mean both the libidinal.
I don't hear you well. I don't hear you.
Is it better like this?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry. When you talk about writing, you talk about economies a lot. And I always feel you mean the libidinal economy as well as the political economy, as if they have never been separated in a way. Could you tell us more on the relationship between the libidinal and the political?
Well, I think you can't dissociate them, even though you might think you do. I mean, I suppose that most of the people who inhabit the political sphere, I don't even know what they think. I don't understand them, but I'm sure that they don't think that they're being committed to a thirst of power through economic situations, means, etc. They probably don't know that it has to do with their sexuality, with their erotic needs, with their apprehensions. I mean, although we have, of course, and particularly now in our situation, we have examples of the entanglement of both, because Trump he's such a phallus, and he's such a, you see what man is looking at him, men in its worst ways, but you see that at work. It's supposed to be a political scene, but the political scene is only a curtain behind which the whole cravings of a former child who has now grown out of the first stages. Freud would tell us about the first stages of development. it's always like that. It has to do with elementary pulsions, with hunger, with murderous pulsions, etc.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? I saw no one on the chat, but just feel free to just go ahead. Further questions? Benno Wirtz, please.
Good evening. Peter Engelmann was asking you about the ordinary and the relation of the ordinary. You said le quotidien and the relation of le quotidien and writing. And if you maybe in a certain perspective, the anecdote is one way of or form of writing about the ordinary or le quotidien. And what would you say, what is the literary potential of the anecdote for writing or for literature?
You know, at first I saw that item, floating, l'anecdote. I thought, what's that? But actually, my ancestor, my great-grandfather is Montaigne. Montaigne, he writes only on that. He goes up his tower. I know his tower by heart. I go there every year. And I can see the steps, and I can see Montaigne thinking that there's dirt around this step, and there weren't windows. It was paper that has been torn, and from the fence, from the window, he looks at the world, actually, at the world, but he sees that one of the donkeys has hurt its leg, or his or her legs. And when he experiences death, because once he died, Montaigne died. It starts with the fact that a little man, he was short. A little man was riding a little horse, and suddenly a huge horse, which was probably carrying one of the farmers around, just crashed on the little man on the little horse, and he died. He experienced death, and he was revived. And that's one of the roots and starting blocks of literature. Then you see this experience, this motive will go everywhere through literature. It starts really on a path in the countryside of La Dordogne, with those details, which all of them, each detail is, it may appear as picturesque, but no. Each detail is exactly as in a dream. It has, it's faithful. It contributes to the extraordinary precision of the scene, and yet when Montaigne goes back home, he has wound, and he'll recover a long time, much later. All these details make for the deepest. Do you call that anecdote? Yes, the deepest what should I say? Thinking wound, which is why it repeats itself later. But what makes the scene unforgettable are all those little details. When I would speak with Derrida every day, actually. And what did we speak about? I should say about literature and philosophy every day, and politics, but it's the same. It's the same. But never under the direct title of "Let's do philosophy." No, it was just gathering or evoking a collection of little details, anecdotes of daily life, out of which would come out all kinds of hues and tints of future thinking. It was very concrete, always. I'll give you an instance. I'm in my writing house in the southwest of France, not very far from Montaigne. I'm writing, and in front of me there's a forest with my friends, the squirrels. And I'm looking at the squirrels while speaking with Derrida. And so I observe the way the squirrels, with whom I'm very familiar, go up as down, down as up, in a so specific and extraordinary way, which you might envy, really. One would all want to equate climbing up and down. It's just climbing. So I just tell him, that's what I'm seeing, you know, because I'm just observing as a star, as if it was astronomy. And then it becomes a motive in what I write, what he writes, etc. And more, because you go on the trail of the squirrel and you discover a wealth of meanings and lessons.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Sandro Zanetti, please go ahead.
Hello. I wanted to know if you read yourself while writing. So what is the importance of reading, or isn't the act of reading while writing of any importance? And I mean not reading other books, but reading what yourself just have written, right? So how do you deal with this reading the own handwriting or own computer writing, whatever?
Oh, it's a very good question, actually, because I know that writing and reading are not even twins, it's the same. So I should maybe think in two different stages. While writing, you read. One should forge a word for that, which I can't, because writing and reading, I just cannot portmanteau them. But it's for me, it's absolutely simultaneous. What I'm writing, I'm reading immediately, and which of course makes the strength of the writing, because reading immediately comes into a dialogue with the writing, and immediately orients differently, or adds, or multiplies, or divides, or thins, or thickens, etc. immediately. That's the first moment. And it can't be otherwise. It can't be otherwise. And even while reading, there are all kinds of additions of voices coming from all kinds of ancestors. But then, of course, there's a second moment when you have written, and you reread in order to check. That's something which is widely recognized, of course. Then you correct, you add, or on the contrary, you cut, etc., etc. And it's very important, because then it's the boiling matter has become more colder, and before it petrifies, you have quickly to operate. In other words, it's still moving. You have to check the eruption, because it can contain all kinds of real vices, that, of course, all the dangers are there. You can have, because you have had a second of laziness, which is always lurking. You can have let a cliché, soil a sentence. But this is the second time, and for me it's much less interesting. That is the moment of tidying of. It's more superficial, but it's necessary, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, time was flying, sadly, but it is because we, I guess, all enjoyed it so much. Hélène Cixous, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
We have time, no?
We have time?
We can. If
you have time, we can keep going, of course.
If there are other questions, yes, why not?
Are there other questions? I'm sure there are other questions.
It's a pleasure.
Well, Thomas Trautmann.
Actually, I wasn't writing the chat.
Oh.
I think it was Philippe Hubmann. I'm sorry. There was mixing up. Philippe, go ahead.
Philippe Hubmann.
I can start. Yes, dear Mrs. Cixous, reading a German autobiography, besides many other aspects, I was intrigued by your descriptions of your grandmother and also how your German influenced your understanding of language as such. From a historic standpoint, do you remember whether German literature was available in Oran at this time? First question, and second question would be, which German literature was read by your parents and family? Thank you.
Oh, I was brought up with very classically with Goethe and Heine, because that belonged to the general bourgeois education of my grandmother, particularly, and so for me it replaced completely, because there wasn't any room for other quotations, if I can say so. It replaced completely the references in French literature. It was German, and I adored it. So it was German Romanticism with a streak of liberalism, of revolutionary mind. Although my grandmother didn't know anything about it, but she could recite, and I enjoyed it enormously. Then I was attracted, I don't even know why, because I know that my mother and grandmother resisted. They resisted, for instance, German. They didn't want me to, they pushed me towards English. And later I would ask them, but why did you do that? Why do you do that? So they would say, because during the war, we didn't want you to be Germanized, so. But I was attracted, and I can tell you that the first books that I have read, apart from tales, tales, Hoffmann, etc. Of course, where after all, really, and I still feel the same. Kleist, above all, or Büchner, I have adored them really, and for me it was the revelation of real literary imagination, and they have no equivalent for me. I still go on reading them and admiring the extraordinary purity of their minds and the power, the invention. So then later, of course, I read more and more, even though I'm still attached to that great period of German writing. Then it's I shouldn't say German. I should say German. Well, I discovered later, for instance, that Austria was not Germany, etc. But I must say, because I owe him something, that with Osnabrück, when I started exploring the treasures of this city, I didn't know that Remarque was an Osnabrück born, although he hated Osnabrück, of course. Enfin, he hated Germany. And but I remember very well when I read in Westen nichts Neues for the first time, and for me it was a shock of beauty, and it doesn't mean that the work that arrives after he has written that the further novels, which are honorable, they're not as great as in Westen. But I think this is something that has been given to mankind. Really, it's very, 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 very beautiful.
Thank you. Any further questions?
I mean, if we have time, I would actually like to pose a question after Philipp Hubmann. So you've been talking a lot about translation, even in the talk with Peter Engelmann now. And so I was wondering to focus another perspective. How can literature deal with the question of intranslatability? Or is there a moment of intranslatability? And is it a problem for literature, or is it a potential for literature when it comes to literature and translation?
It's part of literature. It's interesting. I think that one has to distinguish between the object of intranslatability, which has become a topic for theses, dissertations of all kinds, and discussions, etc., which eventually causes something excessive and I think, well, it's a matter for scholarship. But we're always in translation. Everything. I mean, we don't write a sentence. We don't say something which is not a translation. It's always translated and not translated. Always. So this is language. This is communication. Address. It's always being translated. At the moment I address you, you're translating. I'm translating myself into your translating, etc., etc. But that, of course, is very interesting because it makes for an enormous amount, for instance, of comical matter in Shakespeare, etc. It's all in language. Then a great work is untranslatable. It is untranslatable. It's its first quality, the sign that something is happening in language. And thank God, because if it were translatable, it would be the naked bone. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. And then we have come in modern times to the point where people hate what is not translatable, because they want to swallow things rapidly, as if you were eating a burger. So that's the problem. It's a contemporary problem, and it's ridiculous. Then foreignness, that is very important, and it's a cultural question. It's a national question every time. You have countries where, particularly in the north of Europe, people are they are multilingual naturally, and it's a joy. It's a wealth. They certainly don't approach those themes as the cultures, the national cultures, which are overpowering the others, as the French had hereditary conviction that French is the language of intelligence, philosophy, rights of man, etc., etc. Or English, which is the world language. Germany, less, as it's just, you can just check and see. So I myself, I have been brought up with an openness to all languages. In my family, it was ordinary, as if you go to the market and you're not going to buy only one kind of vegetable. You try everything. It was like that in my house when I was a kid. And for a long time, as I wrote, I estranged French naturally, not artificially. But since I knew the constructions of German or English, etc., so different and so interesting, I thought, well, if French isn't used to that, we can do it. You can do it. You can shape, sculpt, play with signifiers freely. Then it's forbidden. Why should it be forbidden? It's only a matter of fashion. And it took me a long time before I eventually really imposed to particularly my publishers the fact that I'm using very often all kinds of not foreigners, but friend languages or idioms inside the French. Whatever it is, whether it's Latin or whether it's German or English. And I started saying, now, if my character is speaking in a kind of distorted French or a Germanized or an English one, I don't care, it's going to be there. And some readers protested. They said, can't you write French? They've always asked me, why don't you write French? Always. But they don't say that to poetry. Poetry is also totally foreign, but it's accepted. It's poetry, it's marginal. Yes, it should be untranslatable. Then it doesn't mean that it is absolutely untranslatable. When I work with my translators, for most of them, they're my friends, sometimes they're unhappy that a certain play on signifiers has absolutely no equivalent in the other language. Never mind. It's anyway, it's a musical composition. On the page, you'll find mathematically another way of introducing another type of play of signifiers.
Thank you. Any last questions? All right. So thank you, Hélène Cixous, for this wonderful conversation about writing, which we all enjoyed very much. Thanks everyone for participating, for asking, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. and goodbye for tonight. And thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Dank u zeer alle.
Yeah, applause.